we presume that we're often different than other animals. As human beings, we think we're different in all sorts of different ways. But as I have studied various different areas of life, I begin to realize that we're not so different. We're very similar in a lot of ways. And I'm much more of an ecologist at this point, I believe, than many other fields, because I think that there are some universal truths that happen across all living organisms. And if you sort of break it down in terms of what we do compared to any number of different animals, beasts, living things, you begin to realize, like, hey, wait a minute, there's some fundamental principles that are going on here that underlie what we actually do. And it doesn't seem all that spectacularly different. Things may look different, but it could be just the perspective that we have. And if we are another beast, for example, then our world is going to look different. Right? So if I was an ant, for example, my perspective is that my ant world is the universe, and it all sort of makes sense in the perspective of the ant world. And we would look at the things that we do as human beings, and we think those things are absurd or unusual. I was just thinking about how not unique we are in a lot of ways within this particular world that we live in. And we have to somewhat embrace this as like we're kind of in a weird way, and I don't like the sort of term, but we're kind of weirdly interconnected, where we have a lot of the same similarities as any other living organism that exists. And even to believe that we have some sort of cognitive abilities or emotional abilities or anything that you think is fundamentally human is a big step. And that we are somehow different or unique in some sort of way, that's a big leap that we have to make. And it's almost always, once we start studying a particular thing, a particular phenomenon, we begin to realize, like, hey, wait a minute, that's not different. I do that kind of stuff too, and that makes sense to me. Why would it be any different if we all come from very similar beginnings, and we're all just a bunch of cells that are all part of some mishmash of things? Now, if you start thinking about that, right, you might start thinking, well, does that exclude any sort of, other beings helping us out in various different ways? No, it doesn't, right? Because there's always explanations that we don't have that are very difficult to come across and make sense of. And we'll never be able to know those things. Those are somewhat unknowable things. But if you just look at the similarity between all living things and what we do and how we behave, man, there are some amazing similarities that you can think about. And now we might call it a different process when we're looking at something. So for example, if we're looking at how trees breathe, for example, we're not going to call it breathing, right? We're going to call it something else, right? But the fundamental process of what's going on is sort of intaking and outtaking of air. It's very similar, right, in terms of what we actually do now, or how we absorb. So for example, trees are going to absorb nitrogen, and then they're going to put out oxygen. Well, we do similar things, but in the opposite direction, right? If you start looking at all of the connectiveness and the similarities that we have, you begin to wonder, why is it that we actually think of ourselves as unique and different, and somehow perhaps even better than the outside world?